Temple Mount area, the conflict, that 40 acres, most contested piece of property in the world, probably going to spark World War III. And we have, President Biden and others around the world right now pressuring Israel. You've got to have a two-state solution, and you guys have to make this happen. You got to get Gaza done. You got to get out of there, and you got to respond to that. And I just want you to see this video clip. I want you to respond to it. What's the implication for America? What's the implication for the rest of the world as we pressure Israel to divide the land?
Meanwhile, the Foundation for Defense of Democracy CEO Mark Dubowitz writing, the Biden administration is setting the stage to abandon Israel. What started off as we are totally with you in destroying Hamas, which is as bad as ISIS, is deteriorating into you don't have our support unless you can dismantle Hamas very quickly with very limited civilian casualties. That is impossible. Pete, I want to pull up for you. This is from the Times of Israel. It is allegedly what Tony Blinken said in a private meeting with Israel. Here it goes. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says the entire Israeli society is united behind the goal of dismantling Hamas, even if it takes months, to which Blinken allegedly replied, I don't think you have the credit for that. That would be as if nearly 3,000 Americans died on 9/11. We go into Afghanistan and our ally Israel or the United Kingdom says you don't have the credit for that. While, and we're going to put this up while you speak, they're finding tunnels under children's beds. They're going into hospitals and finding weapons. That is what Israel is dealing with.
It's absolutely absurd. And this is how Hamas fights. This is who Hamas is. We've seen it on display since October 7th and well before that. You got a generation of vets here in America who spent 2 decades overseas knowing how Islamists think and the depth of their depravity and their commitment to their cause to kill crusaders, to kill Jews, to kill Westerners. That's their view. And Benjamin Netanyahu has a very clear-eyed view about that, too. That's why his statement of Hamas will be eradicated, I believe him. That's exactly what Israel should do, down to the very last one of them, including the leaders in Qatar. But use that phrase, bear hug. What they're going to do is, a bear hug can go one way and it can go the other way. You can end up strangling somebody with a bear hug. And they're going to keep squeezing and squeezing because that's been the instinct of this White House from the beginning. Maybe Joe's got some warm fuzzies about his support for Israel from the past, but all the staffers, everyone else inside the White House is clearly far more in that pro-Palestine, and Blinken's at the front end of that. So your solution now is to push a two-state solution? With who? Yeah, who's in charge on the other side? A terror state? Now's our time to sweep in? It's upside down.
Jan, respond. I mean, it's somewhat insane, just from a human perspective, apart from the Bible, to say, hey, these people are trying to kill you, and now you need to reward them by giving them land. I mean, that would be like the terrorists, attacking here 9/11 and saying, hey, we want you to come back and have your own airlines, and we'll give you the state of Connecticut or something. I mean, am I right?
The purpose of this clip is the fact that America is turning on Israel. Now, Mr. Biden probably said some things that sounded pretty good. That would be back in early October of 23. He's no friend of Israel, folks. He's no friend of Israel. He's their bitter enemy. He despises that little nation. So don't buy into anything positive that he's saying. And I have a little Bill Koenig on my shoulder. I've worked with Bill, White House correspondent, over 20 years, who's written a book. When America does this or this or this to compromise and marginalize Israel, we are pounded, either with weather events, political events. He's got a thick book showing exactly what happens, going back 30 years. So the only point here is there are consequences to doing what this administration is doing as we speak, and it's going to get very, very tense because they're trying to literally force a Palestinian state, which is the final solution. It's no solution, final solution on Israel. She would then have terrorists, thugs, and criminals rewarded, as Mark said, rewarded for their barbarism.
And if you think about it, I mean, really, Israel pulled out of Gaza September of 2005. Yeah. They removed 9,000 Jews that lived there, said, you're going to leave, and actually removed them by force, some of them. Dug up the graves of Jews, said, we got to get you out of here because we're going to turn it over to the Palestinians, the people that are living there. They elect Hamas. I mean, in a sense, it was a state. Gaza was a self-governing state. And what did they do since 2005? Shoot rockets, build tunnels, and harass Israel the whole time. So we know what this is going to look like. What's going to be the consequence for America if we keep pushing Israel?
Well, it's interesting that in Joel chapter 3, 1 and 2, that one of the reasons Armageddon happens is because of them. It says very clearly, those that I'm going to come into judgment with those who divided up my land and scattered my people. And so it's interesting that's the big mama judgment that we're going to see at the end of the tribulation. But God's principles are the same. That this is his land, it's his reputation's on the line, and we're going to continue to see from now until the Lord comes back, Israel being increasingly isolated.
Yeah.
And so, as you mentioned, going back to Obama, they despise Israel, they hate Israel. Biden's no different. And so, when we think about, for example, the Gog-Magog war, who's there for Israel during that one? Nobody. They have already been isolated. So we're watching this happen. We're watching all the developments in this latest thing. And again, it's complete insanity, hypocrisy about all these governments trying to force Israel. But Israel has to stand. And they'll say we have to stand against the pressure. But how much pressure? That's going to be the ultimate question.
You know what's interesting to me? In Genesis 17, God says, well, in 12, he says, I'm going to show you a land that I'm going to give to you. And then in Genesis 17, he marks it out, Great River of Egypt to the Tigris. It's always funny to me, and Satan always does the opposite. Israel needs to give up more land. Just so you know, God's made a promise to give them a lot more land, and Jesus is going to pull it off, all right? So just kind of keep that in mind. And secondly, for me, when I think about what's unfolding, when I trusted Christ, I'm reading through the Bible, and I realized, and I remember my mom, even before I trusted Jesus, she said, Mark, God blesses people and nations that bless Israel. I mean, that's what it says in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. God made that promise. And she made me promise a little boy, even before I trusted Jesus, always help the Jewish people anytime you want God's blessing. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. Now, the opposite is true. And I used to think, how will America pass off the scene? How will the U.S. dollar being so strong? How could we have, be the world superpower and be reduced? Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to be happening right before our eyes.
One of the men behind this, and I just want to clarify a little bit, is Anthony Blinken, Jewish, self-hating. They hate the fact that they are Jewish because they hate everything that we're dealing with here, hate Israel, hate the problem that Israel has created in the Middle East so the Palestinians don't have their land. Sorry, Jesus didn't come from occupied territory. It's God-given land. But not according to these politicians and these diplomats. And when they're self-hating Jews like Anthony Blinken, you got a real problem. And there are lots and lots of Jews like that. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think just as we watch America decline, again, just read the book of Jeremiah. Because, again, we're going to have I think we're going to have those same feelings of watching the leadership make dumb decisions that are anti-God, doing wickedness in places, as we all know, and yet God having to judge that, and watching our country, which we love, just go completely because God's like, I'm judging them. And again, when you curse Israel, you get a curse.